Welcome back. Freedom of information is the foundation of a country's democracy. But if you ask our next guest, Canada's system is completely broken.
Robyn Doolittle is one of two leading reporters on the Globe and Mail's recent Secret Canada investigation. She's here to tell us all about it. Welcome back to The Social, Robyn.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay. Most of us have heard the words freedom of information, but when we talk about it as it applies to Canada, what exactly do we mean here?
Okay, so freedom of information, FOI,
Yeah.
This exists across Canada. It's legislation. It's in more than 130 countries around the world. It's basically the framework by which regular people can access records from their government. It's putting into law the idea that we as citizens and taxpayers have a right to know what our governments are doing and how they're spending our money.
Yeah. So this is about, right now, a lack of transparency, and I really want to drive that point home. And you give us an example about how high stakes this lack of transparency can be.
Yeah, so my colleague Tom Cardoso and I worked on this for more than a year and a half. We found that across the country, public institutions are regularly breaking the law. They're violating time statutory requirements. They're withholding information that they shouldn't. And there's just a general lack of transparency in this country. And I think something that really drove the point home for me was a story that I was working on right before we decided to do this investigation. I don't know if you remember the condo tower that collapsed in Florida in Surfside. Tragic, killed hundreds of people, the Champlain Towers. It was built by Canadians. Natural question for the investigative team at the Globe was, have they built buildings in Canada? And the sad thing is we were able to find some, but not all, because unlike in Florida, where they publish all sorts of records online, such as what developers are building, what the status is of those buildings, what other companies they're affiliated with, none of that information is readily available in Canada.
So there are, just to be clear, there are buildings built in Canada by that same company, and you just can't exactly figure out.
All of them, not
all of them. We were able to, after 4 months, find some of them, but I did this by reading classified ads from the Globe and Mail through the 1960s, page by page, looking for names. And then that's the only way that you can start to pull that thread. In the United States, it's all online. We completed the American leg of that investigation in 3 days.
Wow.
That's one example. And really, this FOI issue, permeates every level of society and culture. For example, you've been covering the Hockey Canada scandal. So have FOIs been used in that investigation?
Yeah, there's kind of two angles to Hockey Canada. One is, what happened with the police investigation, because they did an initial investigation and then didn't go anywhere. And then there's the governance side. What's going on with Hockey Canada, the organization, which is not a public institution, but receives huge amounts of public money. So there are FOIs being filed to understand the government side of things, but on the police side, this is another great example of, in other countries, we'd be able to get some idea of what's happening inside the London Police Service and why that investigation didn't go anywhere. In Canada, we won't know that unless there's a trial or unless we can get, the people involved to consent to the information's release, which raises obvious problems. We need to be able to investigate this stuff.
So journalists need this information and issue these requests, but this isn't just a problem for journalists. So what is the impact of this on the average Canadian?
Yeah, I think you hear, if anyone follows journalists on Twitter, hopefully none of you are on Twitter, because, anyway, you're hearing journalists complain constantly about FOI, but actually the biggest users of the system are regular people and businesses. They're looking things like, you want to build an addition on your house, is your house on a floodplain? If you're involved in a police issue, that comes up a lot. You might want to find out about your case, how it's going, maybe you need it for insurance purposes. There was one case we wrote about where a woman had filed a complaint against her husband. Years later, wanted to see what happened with it, and the police denied her access to her own interview because of privacy concerns, because she said her ex-husband's name, and that was his privacy. So that's an example of what kind of country are we living in that this sort of stuff happens?
Yeah, it's nonsense. I think for some people this can feel very big picture, but there is an individual at the other end who's also making these decisions, so to withhold information. So what can you tell us about the employees who have all this power?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because, in some ways, it's easy to get really angry at the specific FOI coordinator that you're dealing with. And I mean, I should actually say it's different everywhere. There's no standardization in the system, which is a huge problem. So some places have a specific FOI department and there are specialists. Some are just kind of the town clerk or some random person or consultants that do it. But they have bosses, right? And they're not trained. Like, that was something that was fascinating. Tom and I interviewed hundreds of people for this investigation, including dozens and dozens of FOI coordinators. None of them had training before they started their job. And this is complicated legislation, but part of it is that there is no training. There's one course in the country at the University of Alberta that does a 6-class module around this. And some of them had done it, but only after they were in the sector. So you get a culture of secrecy within the public service, pressure from the minister's office, don't embarrass us. There's no consequences for withholding information in Canada. You can just do it. There's no consequences. So you can understand why these FOI coordinators are, maybe not pushing boundaries of releasing information.
I mean, who's going to say to their boss, like, if they say, I don't want you to give that information, no one's going to say,
Exactly, and we've heard that specifically from people.
Okay, so if we look at other countries, and take cues from them, what are the sort of more enticing models, more transparent systems that are at place, or better solutions that you came across?
Yeah, we just did a big story about this, but the one I'll focus on is Mexico blew me away. In Mexico, one, access to information is a constitutional right. In Canada, it is not. In Mexico, by law, public institutions have to post all sorts of information online, just on their own before FOI. Things like government contracts, things like public servants, org charts, their compensation that they're receiving, their job titles, all information's related to bid processing, just basic stuff that in Canada, you can't even get some of that information through FOI if you go through the long, broken process.
Okay, so very quickly, you built a public resource that can help Canadians understand and file requests for information. Can you quickly tell us about that?
Yeah, this was really important for us. We didn't want to be just journalists complaining about FOI. We wanted to provide a solution. secretcanada.com, we filed hundreds and hundreds of FOIs with hundreds and hundreds of public bodies across the country's cities, hospitals, school boards, ministries, universities, crown corporations, and asked for all of the FOIs that they completed in the last year and a half. So you can go online, if you're interested in bike lanes, snapping turtles, you can find that information on secretcanada.com and see what records have already been released.
And lastly, yeah, that's great. You've been investigating for almost 2 years. Have you seen any shifts or progresses in that time?
Big goal for us off the top was we know people don't really know about this issue. So the first phase of this investigation is just educating the public. And that's why conversations like this are so important. And we're so grateful that you had us on today. And in the fall, that's when we're going after the politicians and our leaders to do something about it. So get ready.
Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for informing us. Your efforts are so appreciated, Robyn. We look forward to hearing from you on your next assignment. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Hey there, what did you think? Drop your comments below and join the conversation. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can find more on everything from food and fashion to pop culture and current events. See you soon.